I want to start today's deep dive with a number. And frankly, when I first saw this in the research packet, I actually assumed it was a typo.
I have a very strong feeling I know exactly which number you're talking about.
Yeah, I had to go back to the source document, the 8K filing, just to double check my own eyes. It's 1,842%.
It's a pretty wild figure to see on an official document, isn't it?
It sounds completely fake, but it is not a typo. That is the approximate revenue jump for a company called Redcat Holdings in the fourth quarter of 2025 compared to exact same time the previous year.
Right.
We are talking about a company going from bringing in roughly $1.3 million, which, let's be honest, is basically coffee money in the defense world, to somewhere between 24 and 26 million in a single quarter.
It's a staggering jump. I mean, usually when we see four-digit percentage growth like that, we're talking about a volatile meme coin or some viral app that just crashes a month later. But this isn't software. Well, it's not just software. This is hardware. This is defense technology. You simply cannot fake that kind of physical volume.
That is exactly the point. You can't just code a 2,000% revenue jump in manufacturing. You actually have to bend metal, build things, ship them out, and get paid. So that number tells a much, much bigger story than just the financial success of one specific firm.
It really does. It signals a major shift in the tectonic plates of the defense sector as a whole. Redcat is becoming the prime example of a new breed of defense contractor.
Right.
They're nimble, they're heavily software-defined, but they're scaling physical hardware to meet a geopolitical reality that has changed drastically in just the last few years.
So the mission for today's deep dive is to unpack that massive explosion in growth. We aren't just doing a stock analysis of Redcat Holdings here. For those tracking the market, the ticker is RCAT. But what we're really doing is a deep dive into how a company actually crosses the infamous valley of death in the defense industry.
Which is where most ambitious startups go to die.
Yeah. We need to figure out how they went from AI hype to tangible, battlefield-ready hardware. And we really want to look at the situation of the company alongside its sector to kind of create a lens into their future vision. What does it mean when modern warfare is being entirely rewritten by drones that you can just stuff into a rucksack?
Let's start right there with that valley of death concept, because to understand the revenue jump you mentioned, you really have to understand the sheer obstacle course they just survived.
It sounds dramatic, like something out of a fantasy novel.
Yeah.
But in the Pentagon, it's a very real, very scary place for a business.
Oh, absolutely. The Valley of Death refers to that excruciating gap between developing a really cool prototype, maybe you win a small innovation grant, get a nice pat on the back at a trade show.
Yeah, take some nice photos.
Right, take some photos. But the gap between that and actually securing a government program of record.
And program of record is the magic phrase here, right?
It is the absolute holy grail. It means you are officially in the federal budget. You aren't just a science fair project anymore. You are a designated line item for the United States military.
Okay.
The problem is, bridging that gap can literally take years. You have to keep your engineers paid, your lights on, and your investors happy, while the government just slowly churns through bureaucracy, tests, evaluations, and endless delays.
And that is exactly where most of these small tech companies run out of cash. They just burn out waiting for the phone to ring.
Precisely. That's the graveyard. And that is what makes Redcat's recent timeline so significant. They didn't just survive the valley, they effectively paved a highway over it. And the catalyst for that was the U.S. Army's Short-Range Reconnaissance Program, the SRR.
Right. And from the source material, this wasn't just a submit a PDF proposal and hope for the best situation.
No, not at all. This was a grueling, multi-year, mud-on-the-boots competition. They had to prove their systems worked in the actual field, in terrible weather, under intense electronic warfare stress. And the ultimate winner was Redcat's subsidiary, Teal Drones, with their Black Widow system.
And the prize for winning that wasn't just a trophy. It was an acquisition objective of 5,880 systems over a 5-year period.
Which is massive. That is not a pilot program. That is fleet building. That's the Army essentially saying, this is our standard issue gear now.
Which obviously explains the 1,842% revenue jump. But here's the catch, and where I want to push back a bit, or at least look at the reality of it. You cannot build nearly 6,000 drones on good vibes alone.
No.
You need capital, massive capital. And looking at your balance sheet from September 2025, the transformation there is honestly just as wild as the revenue numbers.
It is the fuel for the fire. If you look closely at the books, as of September 30, 2025, Redcat reported a war chest of approximately $206 million to $212.5 million. That's in cash and accounts receivable.
That is an unbelievable safety net for a company of this size.
I'd actually argue it's more than a safety net. It's strategic leverage. You see, a lot of small defense companies are constantly on the verge of starvation.
Right.
They have to constantly dilute their shareholders, basically printing more stock just to buy parts for the next order. It becomes this awful death spiral. Redcat now has the liquidity to actually fulfill these massive army orders and build out new factories without scrambling for cash every Friday.
So they have the huge contract and they have the cash to execute it.
Yeah.
But I want to zoom out and look at the sector as a whole. Why is this happening right now? Why is the Army suddenly buying thousands of small backpack-sized drones instead of just, I don't know, a new fighter jet?
This connects directly to a macro shift we're seeing across the entire defense sector. For a long time, maybe the last decade, the market was totally obsessed with software, AI, algorithms, the digital realm.
Sure.
But investors and generals alike are waking up to the fact that software needs a vessel.
Because you can't exactly destroy a Tane with just code?
Well, you can certainly try, but it's much harder. You need physical hardware to execute AI in the real messy world. You can have the smartest, most advanced targeting algorithm in existence, but if you can't fly it over a hill to actually see what's on the other side, it's useless. The pendulum is swinging hard back to metal. To hardware.
And there's a huge geopolitical angle here, too, which really frames their current situation. I keep seeing mentions of the NDAA and these bans on Chinese tech.
That is the moat around this entire market right now. The National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, essentially bans Chinese-made drones from U.S. defense supply chains.
Which directly targets DJI.
Right. For years, DJI dominated the drone market globally, and they make great drones, but you simply cannot use a DJI drone for U.S. military reconnaissance. The security risk of that data leaking back to servers in China is considered way too high.
So that legislative move effectively clears the entire playing field. If you are the U.S. Army, you have to buy American.
Exactly. It creates a highly protected market for domestic companies like Redcat. And it's not just the U.S. military driving this. The Black Widow system was recently added to the NATO Support and Procurement Agency catalog, the NSPA.
That's quite a mouthful. What does being in that catalog actually mean for their sales?
The easiest way to think of it is like Amazon Prime for NATO.
Okay.
It's a fast lane. If a NATO ally in Europe wants to buy these specific drones, they don't have to start a brand new, tedious tender process, write a new request for proposal, and wait 2 years. They can literally just order them from the catalog.
Wow. And given everything happening in Eastern Europe right now, the lessons being learned over there, I imagine the demand for these smaller expendable systems is incredibly high.
Expendable really is the key word here. We aren't talking about a $100 million fighter jet that you have to protect at all costs. Modern warfare is shifting rapidly toward autonomy and mass.
Right.
You want systems that are cheap, easy for a soldier to carry, and if they get shot down or jammed...
It's an annoyance, not a multi-million-dollar tragedy.
Exactly. The drone takes the physical risk, so the human doesn't have to.
Speaking of taking risks and looking toward the future, Redcat isn't just banking on this one Black Widow drone to carry them forever. They seem to be building out a whole ecosystem, an entire vision for the future. They call it the arachnid family, sticking with the whole spider theme.
It's a very cohesive strategy. They understand you can't be a one-trick pony, so you have the Black Widow, which acts as the scout, but then they have the FNE. And this is an FPV drone, a first-person view drone.
Now, when I hear FPV, my mind instantly goes to, like, teenagers racing drones in a park with those VR goggles on.
Sure, but this is definitely not for racing. The FNE is strictly optimized for military operations. In this specific context, FPV usually implies a loitering munition capability.
So a suicide drone.
Effectively, yes.
Okay.
A precision strike asset. So you have the scout drone finding the target and the striker drone actually hitting it.
Wow.
And then to really round out their air dominance, they have the Treshan. That's a fixed-wing VTOL.
VTL, meaning vertical takeoff and landing. So it goes straight up like a helicopter, but then transitions and flies like a normal airplane.
Correct. And that geometry matters immensely. Because it flies on wings rather than just rotors, it has much longer range and endurance than a standard quadcopter.
Hmm.
And importantly, they didn't just stop with their own internal R&D. They recently acquired a company called FlightWave Aerospace to really double down on this fixed-wing capability.
Right. That acquisition brought in the Edge 130 Blue system, if I recall.
Yes. The Edge 130 is a hybrid VTL, and it boasts a 2-hour flight time.
That's huge.
It's a massive jump in endurance compared to the maybe 30 or 40 minutes you might get from a standard quadcopter. And almost immediately after the acquisition, they announced over $500,000 in new orders for that Edge 130 system from the Army National Guard and other agencies.
Which is crucial, right? Because it shows the acquisition wasn't just for a press release. It's generating revenue literally right out of the gate.
It validates the purchase instantly. It proves there was pent-up demand.
Okay, so they clearly have short-range, strike, and long-range air coverage sorted out. But here is where this deep dive gets really fascinating for me in terms of their future vision.
Right.
Because they aren't staying in the sky. They just launched a brand new division called Blue Ops, Inc.
And this represents their broader long-term vision perfectly. They are expanding aggressively into the maritime domain with uncrewed surface vessels, USVs.
Sea drones.
Exactly, sea drones.
And from what I read, this isn't just some glossy PowerPoint presentation to get VC funding. They have real infrastructure for this. I saw notes about a massive facility down in Georgia.
155,000 square foot facility, to be exact. And they claim it's capable of producing 500 of these vessels per year. This really signals that Redcat intends to dominate all domains. They want to be the go-to provider for autonomous systems, whether you are operating in the air, on the land, or at sea.
It makes total sense strategically when you think about it. If you look at the Pacific Theater, for example, it's almost entirely water. You need eyes on the waves just as much, if not more, than in the sky.
You do, and the concept of loitering applies there just as well. Imagine a small autonomous boat that can just sit quietly in a critical strait for days on end, just listening and watching, without putting a single sailor's life at risk. That is the capability they are building with Blue Ops.
But, hardware, whether it floats or flies, is ultimately only as good as the brains running it. And this is where a very specific partnership popped up in our research that I think honestly changes the valuation and the ceiling of this company entirely, and that is Palantir.
Oh, absolutely. Palantir is the heavy hitter here. They aren't just some startup drone software company. They are arguably the premier data defense company in the world right now.
So what are they actually doing with Redcat? Because, we hear the phrase AI partnership thrown around every single day in the tech news. It's almost lost its meaning.
It has, but this is highly practical. Redcat is collaborating with Palantir to integrate some very specific combat-necessary capabilities. The big one to understand is visual navigation, or VNav.
Let's help the listener understand why that matters so much. Because we all have GPS on our phones. It works great. Why do these advanced drones need something called visual navigation?
Because in a real war against a near-peer adversary, think Russia or China, the very first thing that goes away is GPS.
They just jam it.
They jam it, they spoof it. They can actively make your GPS receiver think you are in the middle of the Pacific Ocean when you're actually flying over a desert. If your drone relies solely on satellites to know where it is, the second it enters a jamming environment, it basically becomes a very expensive paperweight.
Right.
Or worse, it just flies off in a random direction and crashes.
So VNav allows the drone to what exactly? Look at the ground and figure it out.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It allows the drone to navigate visually. It uses its cameras to recognize terrain features, buildings, roads, and landmarks, and it constantly matches them to an internal preloaded map. It uses optical odometry. It doesn't need a satellite in space to tell it where it is. It literally sees where it is.
That is a massive tactical advantage. That means you can keep operating and completing missions even when the electronic lights go out.
It's an absolute requirement for modern battlefield survivability. And beyond the drones themselves, they are also using Palantir's warp speed.
Which, I have to say, sounds like something straight out of Star Trek.
It really does, but it's actually Palantir's highly advanced manufacturing operating system. Redcat is using warp speed to help scale their production efficiently. Think about it. When you go from building 50 drones a month in a small shop to 5,000 in a massive facility, your supply chain management becomes infinitely more complex.
Yeah, suddenly you're tracking millions of individual screws, microchips, batteries.
Exactly. Warp speed is explicitly designed to handle that exact complexity. tracking parts, optimizing efficiency, predicting bottlenecks before they happen. It brings the intense software discipline of Palantir directly onto the physical factory floor of Redcat.
That makes a lot of sense. Plus, there was also a mention in the sources of swarm technology. I think it was called EPM swarm robotics.
Right, this is the ultimate force multiplier they're integrating. Instead of the traditional model of one human pilot flying one drone, you have one single operator managing an entire swarm of drones. One to many.
Wow.
This allows a single soldier to control a highly coordinated team of robots that can perform complex reconnaissance or strike missions all simultaneously. It completely changes the math of a firefight. And to support all this, Redcat has doubled their manufacturing footprint in Utah for Teal and in California for FlightWave just to meet the anticipated demand.
It really does sound like science fiction becoming reality. But I have to play the cynic here for a moment. We have to look at the full picture. We have the huge revenue jump, the massive cash pile, the incredibly cool tech, the sea drones. But what is the bear case? What could actually go wrong here?
That is the responsible question to ask. Because despite the explosive revenue growth, if you look at the income statement for the 6 months ended June 30, 2025, Redcat still reported a net loss of $36.4 million.
So they are bringing in a lot of money, but they are spending it even faster.
Correct. They are heavily prioritizing growth, scale, and market share over immediate bottom-line profitability. They're building giant factories, hiring top-tier engineers, buying whole companies like FlightWave. That is a very common strategy for high-growth tech companies. I mean, Amazon did it for years, but it is inherently risky. If those government contracts suddenly slow down or get delayed by Congress, that cash burn rate becomes a serious problem.
And looking at the stock itself, it seems like an absolute roller coaster.
It is highly volatile. The analysts have very aggressive price targets out there. Some are saying $19 to $25. But there is also a very significant short interest on the stock. Roughly 20% of the public float is sold short right now.
Meaning a lot of traders are actively betting that the price is going to crash.
They are. However, that creates a unique dynamic. When you have extremely positive news drop, like this massive 1,800% revenue jump, it can trigger what's called a short squeeze.
Walk us through the mechanics of that quickly, just so everyone is on the same page.
Sure. Basically, the short sellers borrowed shares of the stock to sell it, hoping the price would drop so they could buy it back cheaper later and pocket the difference. But if the price suddenly goes up, say, because of a genuinely great earnings report, they're actively losing money.
Right.
If it goes up a lot very quickly, they panic. They're forced to buy the stock immediately at the higher price just to cover their positions and stop their losses.
And all of a sudden, panicked buying pressure drives the price up even further.
Exactly. It forces even more short sellers to buy in. It's a massive feedback loop. It creates explosive upward movement in the stock price, but it also means the stock is definitely not for the faint of heart.
And finally, aside from the stock market mechanics, there's just plain old execution risk. It is one thing to win a massive Army contract on paper. It is an entirely different thing to actually build 5,880 highly advanced drones and deliver them on time without any major quality control issues.
Absolutely. We have seen plenty of promising companies struggle to actually meet demand once the massive orders start rolling in. Redcat has the cash and the facilities now, but the proof will be in the actual delivery. They have to prove they can be a reliable, long-term industrial partner for the Pentagon, not just a cool, innovative startup.
So let's bring it all back home. We have gone from a small drone company to a major player-winning Army programs of record, sitting on over $200 million in cash, partnering with Palantir, and expanding into autonomous sea vessels. What is the big takeaway for the listener here?
So what here is that Redcat is a perfect case study in the broader reindustrialization of the defense space. For decades, the U.S. relied almost exclusively on massive legacy prime contractors, the Raytheons and Lockheeds of the world, for absolutely everything.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing a crucial shift towards software-defined, quickly producible domestic hardware. It's all about bringing that critical manufacturing capacity back home and marrying it with advanced AI and autonomy.
It really feels like we're watching the real-time formation of a completely new kind of defense company.
We very well might be, and that leads to the question I'd really leave everyone with to think about. As modern warfare becomes increasingly autonomous, and as it gets dominated by these massive swarms of cheap, disposable hardware, will the traditional defense giants be nimble enough to pivot? Or is a company like Redcat the actual blueprint for the new defense prime of the 21st century?
That is a truly fascinating thought to end on. From concept to combat, indeed. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today.
It's always a pleasure to unpack these shifts and connect the dots.
And thank you for listening. We will catch you in the next one.